Hello, Dan Ring here, and in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to get started with Nuke's new tracker. Because a lot of things have changed, we're going to go back to basics on creating new tracks and setting up everything you need to get a good track. We'll start by loading up a tracker node. So this is what the new tracker node looks like. If you're familiar with the old tracker, you can see that all the track controls have been moved up to the toolbar. We've also removed the limit of 4 tracks and replaced it with the track table here. This allows you to create as many tracks as you want. Now let's start creating some tracks. And we can do this in a couple of ways. The first is by using this Add Track button. This places a track in the center of the viewer. The second way to create a track is to use the Add Tracks button up here, which, when toggled on, allows us to quickly create tracks anywhere where we click the mouse. We can also use the Shift key to toggle on and off this Add Tracks button. This is probably the quickest and easiest way of creating lots of tracks. So a couple of interesting things appear in the viewer when we add tracks. The first thing here is this zoom window. This allows us to get a good picture of where the track currently is in the frame, and also to finally position it. If we hold Shift and drag, we can magnify this zoom window even further, and really get a much finer position. The second interesting thing is this keyframe window up here. This gives us a snapshot of all the keyframes for this track. So for example, when we created the track, we created a key at frame 196. If we go back a few frames and move the tracker to create a new keyframe, you can see a new window appears. And we can create lots more of these. These windows become a lot more important when we look at our keyframe-based tracking workflow later on. This will be covered in a later tutorial. For the moment, let's simplify things and let's clear all these tracks and start from the beginning. To delete all these tracks, we need to first select them, and we can do this by either drag selecting them all in the viewer, or pressing Ctrl A, or pressing the Select All button here. Then to delete them, we can either go to the viewer and click the Delete or Backspace key, or we can use the Delete Tracks button here. Now let's create our first track. In this example, I'd like to track the girl's nose. I'm going to use the zoom window to give us a precise location for it. To do the tracking, we use these controls up in the toolbar here. Each of these allows us to say what frames we'd like to track. For example, the buttons with the OR in them allow us to specify frame ranges. The buttons with the typical playhead arrows allow us to track to the beginning or the end of the shot. The buttons with the vertical bar and the arrows allow us to track backwards or forwards one frame at a time. And very importantly, the stop button allows us to cancel tracking at any point. So let's just track to the end of this shot. And if we look in the zoom window, we can see that that's doing a pretty good job. So congratulations, we have our first track. And that looks pretty good. It's very important to note that most of these buttons are bound to shortcut keys on the keyboard. For example, if we want to track to the start or the end of the shot, we can use the Z or the V keys. Or if we want to track backwards or forwards one frame, we can use the X or the C keys. So let's track backwards to the beginning of the shot using the Z key. And I'm going to cancel it now using the Escape key. This is the same as pressing stop in the toolbar. This escape key is going to become very important when you start looking at more advanced tracking shots. Now let's talk a little bit about how pattern tracking actually works. To do this, let's go back to our original starting frame and clear all of this track data. We can do this by either scrubbing along the timeline, or a handy shortcut is actually clicking on the keyframe window up here. So we created this keyframe when we started the track. Clicking on it allows us to jump back to frame 165. To clear the track animation path, we can then use this Clear All button up here. If we zoom in on this track, we can see 3 important things. The first is the track position. The second is the pattern window. The third is this outer search window. The way pattern tracking works is that it grabs this pattern at one frame and then tries to match it within the search window of every other frame. So you can see if we skip on one frame, that our original pattern is contained quite nicely within the search window here. This is actually really important when we're tracking. One of the main reasons that tracking fails is because the search window isn't wide enough to capture the motion between frames. Let me show you an example of this problem in this shot. Let's now pretend that we want to track the toe of this girl. So let's zoom in and create a track. And we'll resize the pattern window to fit just the toe. If we now scrub on one frame, we can see that the toe is now completely outside of the search window. This means that the track has no chance of following it into the next frame. So let's try that by tracking forwards one frame. So you can see here the track has completely failed. The key to solving this is making sure the search window is large enough so that it can contain the toe within the next frame. So if we go out here, and then we make the search window massive like this, and let's try retrack now. We can see now that the toe has been correctly found in the next frame. This is sort of an extreme example to show you that high motion needs large search areas. About 90% of all failed tracks can generally be fixed by increasing the search window size to match the amount of motion of the object and also its direction. The next thing to look at is the effect of the pattern window size on the track. So let's delete this track and go back to our first track. After the search window, the pattern window size is the next most important thing to set before tracking. The pattern window defines exactly what's going to be tracked. In this example, when we were tracking the nose, we were actually using pixels from the face and the background to help us track. Having a larger pattern window size increases the stability of the track. The problem then is that it might not localize the feature that you want to track properly. For example, let's do this track again, and I'll cancel it midway. If we look at the zoom window, we can see that the track doesn't exactly follow the tip of the nose properly. This is expected, as we're not exactly tracking just the pixels of the nose, we're using those of the face and the background as well. Let's now go back to our start frame and adjust our pattern window size to fit just those of the nose. And I'm going to track on forwards. And again, I'm going to press escape to cancel. And instantly, if we look at the zoom window here, we can see that we've gotten a much better lock on the tip of the nose. To summarize, always make sure your pattern window size is just big enough to cover the object that you want. For example, the nose. Using a larger pattern window size might give you a more stable result. The track might appear smoother and less jittery. However, it might not localize the point that you actually want to track well enough. And most importantly, if you find your tracks failing for some unknown reason, check to make sure your search window size is large enough to capture the object's motion. In most cases that I've seen when the tracks have failed, they can usually be fixed by just increasing the search window size and then retracking. So that concludes this tutorial on the basics of the new tracker in Nuke, and also an introduction into how pattern tracking works. I hope it's been useful. Thanks for watching.